Hello comrades, it's Comrade Reese here, and today I'm going to be doing a slightly different video than usual, as I'm going to be talking about American movies and how the imperialists can use them to suit their political interests against the working class. Also, please note that the list of movies that I'm going to be talking about are all based on movies that I have seen. A little word of warning though, if you haven't seen any of these movies that I'm going to be talking about, and I really recommend that you don't even bother watching them because they're full of bullshit, then a spoiler alert is coming right up. Number 5, Red Dawn.
Yes, my friend.
Coming in at number 5 is Red Dawn. If you were around in the 1980s, you would, without a doubt, remember the movie Red Dawn. If you have no idea what Red Dawn is about, then I'll explain the storyline. Red Dawn is set in the Midwest of the United States in a parallel and alternate 1980s, in which the United States has gradually become strategically isolated after several European nations, apart from Britain, withdraw from NATO. At the same time, the Soviet Union and its Warsaw Pact partners expand their sphere of influence. In addition, the Ukrainian wheat harvest fails while a socialist revolution happens in Mexico. Soviet and Cuban troops then invade the United States, and a group of high school students form a rebel group called the Wolverines, and they end up fighting against the Soviet Union and Cuba to liberate the United States. Red Dawn is your typical imperialist film, as I like to call it, as it is very hypocritical, because the producers of this film try to picture the United States as the victim, when in reality the United States was, and still is today, a threat to world peace. During the Cold War years, it would have seemed more plausible that there would be teenagers in the Soviet Union or in Cuba forming rebel groups to fight against invading US troops. However, due to the fact that the Soviet Union had a massive army and a huge stockpile of nuclear weapons, and the fact that Cuba was practically being protected by the Soviet Union, such an event would have been unlikely. But during the Russian Civil War that happened between 1918 and 1921, which was when the Bolsheviks were building the very early foundations of the Soviet Union, the United States, along with 13 other imperialist countries, invaded the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic, as it was called then, to try and crush the communists. But they found that they had underestimated the Bolsheviks. Also in the 1960s, the United States attempted to invade Cuba, but they found that they had underestimated Fidel Castro and the people of Cuba, and the Bay of Pigs invasion failed. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Western imperialist countries basically went on a killing spree in countries like Iraq, Yugoslavia, Libya and Afghanistan. The reason why they did this was because there was no more Soviet Union to protect those countries. And if you notice, just as the Soviet Union was being dissolved in the 1990s, the first Gulf War in Iraq was being launched. Also, if you look at the Soviet Union's foreign policy, it was totally different to the foreign policy of the United States. The sole purpose of the Soviet Union's foreign policy was to defend socialist nations, progressive nations, socialist movements or progressive movements from Western imperialism. For instance, the Soviet Union provided support for Korea, Cuba, Vietnam, Afghanistan and so on when they were being threatened and attacked by Western imperialism. Cuba's foreign policy is very similar to the foreign policy of the Soviet Union, because when a natural disaster happens somewhere in the world, Cuba is, without fail, one of the first countries to send out doctors to help people. Cuba also gave support to Nelson Mandela against the apartheid regime in South Africa. Therefore, if anybody who is watching this video actually believes the complete bullshit in Red Dawn, then I'm afraid that I don't know whether to laugh at you or just feel sorry for you. Number 4, Red Dawn.
What's going on?
At number 4, we have the remake of 1984's Red Dawn, and it is just as hypocritical and misleading as the 1984 version. In fact, I think this movie is even worse than the 1984 version. The story is set around a US Marine named Jed Eckert and his brother named Matt Eckert, who is an American football player. One morning, Jed and Matt wake up to see North Korean paratroopers landing in their neighborhood. They then find their father, Tom Eckert, who is a police sergeant, who is eventually killed by the North Korean troops.
What I'm going to ask you to do may be very difficult, but I want you boys to do what I would do. I want you to go to war and stop this piece of shit, or die trying.
The two brothers are later joined by Robert Kittner, Daryl Jenkins and Pete to form their rebel group, the Wolverines. The Wolverines then go on to fight the North Korean soldiers and free the United States. Again, anyone who believes this bullshit must either be fast asleep or high on drugs. This film is another perfect example of the United States pretending to be the victim, when in fact, if you do actually live in the real world, it is really the DPRK that is the victim here, as they face constant US interference and the presence of US troops and several hundred nuclear warheads across the border in South Korea. This is the reason why it seems a lot more plausible that there would be teenagers and families in the DPRK forming rebel groups to fight against invading US troops. However, due to the fact that the DPRK does have the capability to defend itself if such an event were to take place, I think I, along with all others who are standing shoulder to shoulder with the regime and the people of the DPRK, can rest assured that a US invasion of the country is unlikely. As you all already know, maybe from my videos or from just watching the 6 o'clock news while you were having your dinner, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is demonized by the West. In the Second World War, the DPRK was on the side of the victors, as they had been participants in the fight against Japanese colonialism and imperialism and defeating the Japanese Empire. Yet, their reward at the end of the war was that US imperialism forcibly occupied large parts of the Korean peninsula and enslaved the Korean people. Having done that, the United States has never stopped sanctioning the DPRK. The United States has never stopped demonizing the DPRK. The imperialists killed 4 million Koreans, but they still see the Koreans as people who are very aggressive. Essentially, what the United States is trying to do is to throttle the DPRK. And when the DPRK takes the correct measures to defend itself, the imperialists are telling them that they are being aggressive. The DPRK rightly calls the Korean War the Fatherland Liberation War, because it was a war in which US imperialism was thoroughly beaten. It was the first time in the history of the United States of America that its armed forces came out as the losers. It was the first time its armed forces came out with a top general being a prisoner of war. It was the first time that the United States lost so many planes, so many soldiers, so many tanks, notwithstanding the fact that they committed so many murders by dropping gasoline onto people and bombing people, many of them innocent men, women and children. In fact, one of the biggest complaints from American pilots during the Korean War was that there was nothing left to bomb. Number 3. Rocky IV. Rocky IV is not a war film, but it still offers us propaganda that affected the Western world's cultural response to the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
You put that heavy bag with eyeballs in the ring with me, and you're gonna see the meaning of pain.
Why do you insult us?
Now you just hold on here. Don't make me out to be the bad guy. I came here to talk about a friendly exhibition bout till Comrade Big Mouth started. Right.
It's you who are the aggressor.
In Rocky IV, Rocky faces off against a Soviet super soldier named Ivan Drago, a boxer who has been physically conditioned to perfection in the mountains of Siberia, and designed by Soviet planners and scientists to be the perfect fighter.
A normal heavyweight averages 700 pounds of pressure per square inch. As you can see, Drago averages 1,850 pounds. So the result's quite obvious.
And what results are those?
Whatever he hits, he destroys.
Ivan Drago was a testament to the Soviet economy and their scientific superiority, and in this way a fuel for the so-called threat that the Soviet Red Army posed to the world. Yes, the Soviet Union had a huge stockpile of missiles and a massive military, but it was nowhere near a threat to world peace as the United States was and still is today. And the reason for this is because the Soviet Union had a massive military and a massive arsenal of weapons for one reason, and one reason only: to defend itself and its allies. Even though I am a Marxist-Leninist and I am defending the Soviet Union, when it comes to defending the Soviet Union, we Marxist-Leninists only focus on Lenin and Stalin, because when Nikita Khrushchev came into power after the death of Stalin, he regarded all of Stalin's policies as failures, and basically Khrushchev was an opportunist. He set up the terrible revisionist policies of market socialism, and his successors maintained this policy of market socialism through until the 1990s. Basically what Khrushchev and his successors did was that they twisted the Soviet Union's planned economy into a market economy, and within a period of 35 years they managed to restore capitalism in the Soviet Union. The message that I have for anybody who wants to watch this movie is just because we have smartphones and plasma TVs, it does not mean that we live in the land of the free, as reports have come out claiming that the CIA and the NSA have been tapping into people's devices and spying on them. But from a Marxist perspective, this is down to class struggle, because the ruling capitalist class in the United States do not want to lose their power, so they suppress and oppress the working class and demoralise them as much as possible to prevent a socialist revolution. So, who knows, my browser history may be on their watch list. I guess George Orwell was wrong about 1984 being a glimpse of what socialism is really like, because reality clearly shows us that George Orwell's book 1984 is clearly synonymous with the capitalist world in which we live, because in 1984 there's a tiny minority of people in control of everything, and that tiny minority of people is suppressing and oppressing the working class, which is exactly what is happening in today's capitalist world. Number 2, the interview.
Hello, North Korea! Wow.
North side?
Okay, hi. Sorry about what he's doing.
At number 2, we have the interview. The story of this film revolves around a TV presenter named Dave Skylark and a producer named Aaron Rappaport, and they discover that Kim-Jong is a huge fan of their TV show, and due to this, they are both invited to the DPRK by Kim-Jong, and in turn, they are both given a mission by the CIA to assassinate Kim-Jong.
Take him out.
Take him out.
Like for drinks?
No. Take him out.
Take out. Like to dinner?
Take him out to a meal?
Take him out.
Like on the town?
Party?
No, take him out.
You want us to assassinate the leader of North Korea?
Yes.
What?
Dave and Aaron take some toxic chewing gum that the CIA supply them with to the DPRK in order to discreetly kill Kim Jong-un by shaking his hand or offering him a piece of chewing gum. However, this fails, and the toxic chewing gum is found by one of Kim Jong-un's bodyguards, who chews the poisonous gum and spits it out, while being completely oblivious to the danger he had put himself in.
Just a Gucci bag. What's this? Gum. That is gum.
Oh, you fucking tried it.
This gum has no flavor.
You don't like it, just spit it out.
Spit it out. Don't, we wouldn't be insulted if you just spat it out.
Your gum tasted like shit.
He then found himself having a pretty messy death later on in the movie.
Look at it. Oh no, oh no. It's happening.
In the movie, Suk-yen, who is also the chief North Korean propagandist, ends up getting together with Aaron, whilst at the same time, Dave decides to get to know Kim Jong-un and becomes one of his closest friends. But Suk-yen then reveals that she hates Kim Jong-un.
I am a terrible person.
No, you're not. You're the best person. You were about to have sex with me. That's like the best thing someone could do.
I'm the propagandist of a totalitarian dictatorship.
It's an area you could improve, but, you know, you don't have to dwell on it.
He's as cruel as his father and the grandfather before him.
And Dave discovers that Kim Jong-un threatens war with South Korea.
How else can I prevail against so many enemies? Defectors, South Korean capitalists, the people in this room who don't think I can fill my father's shoes. These bastards deserve no humanity. To those who seek to undermine me, at home and abroad, I cannot respond with anything less than the totality of my strength. If 1 billion people across the earth and in my own country must be burned to prove it, then my worthiness as a king will be demonstrated!
Dave then leaves, and after taking a walk, he discovers that a nearby shop that is selling food is merely just a wall, and the food is all plastic, and he then realizes that Kim Jong-un has been lying to him.
Fake carrots! Fake fruit! Fake! Fake! Fake grapefruits! Fake! Liar! You liar!
Dave, Aaron and Suk-yen then form a plan to break Kim Jong-un's cult of personality by causing him to cry on television. They then finally manage to assassinate Kim Jong-un by using a Soviet tank to shoot down a helicopter that he is conducting. After that, Suk-yen becomes the new leader of the DPRK and transforms it into a US-style democracy, and everybody's happy. Now, while this movie did make me laugh, it was also full of bullshit, because if you look back in history, you will find that CIA-funded coups have never brought democracy and freedom. For example, in Libya under Gaddafi, the people were entitled to free education, free healthcare, interest-free loans. Women who had just got married received $50,000 to buy a home. Mothers received $5,000 when they gave birth to a child. Libya's oil was nationalized. Gaddafi's government paid 50% of the price of your car, and unemployed Libyans received as much support as possible from the state. Whether you like Gaddafi or not is irrelevant to me, But to live in a society where you have an anti-imperialist leader and a government that really does look after you is something that the United States hates so much, hence the reason why they funded the coup in Libya. And I will not be surprised if that is what the CIA wants to do to the DPRK as well. Because over in the DPRK, education, housing, healthcare and jobs are all there for you and your family. But in South Korea, it's basically anarchy. It's a game of who can stab each other in the back and exploit their way to the top. This movie also likes to try and tell us that the people of North Korea are starving. By far, this is the most common lie about North Korea. And this contradicts the lie that some people claim, which simply states that the North Korean people are forced to eat soil and grass. So, which one is it? Are they all starving, or are they all forced to eat grass? The answer is neither. Usually, numbers do vary in terms of how many people are supposedly starving. This is possibly due to the fact that this claim is a load of bullshit and has been made up in order to make us hate the DPRK. However, by using statistical data and common sense, we can prove that there is probably nobody who is starving in North Korea. Now, I do understand that there was a famine in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Notice how I emphasized on the word was. After the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the fact that the DPRK relied heavily on food and general aid from other socialist countries, particularly the Soviet Union, also due to the fact that only 21% of their land is arable, and the fact that North Korea is a very mountainous country, meant that they experienced a sudden and very unexpected drop in imports that they used to feed the people. So it is not very wise or honest to blame the North Korean government for the famine if it was caused by a mix of bad geography and unexpected economic conditions. The estimate concerning the death toll of this famine was around 3 million between 1994 and 1998. People still claim that in the present day the population of the DPRK is starving, and to that I say bullshit. That claim is based solely on imperialist propaganda. Ever since the DPRK stopped publishing in detail economic statistics about 50 years ago, it is very difficult to determine exactly how much food there is in the country and if there is enough food to feed around 23 million people. But I think it is safe to say, through using what I already do know about the DPRK, that the North Korean population is not starving. Also, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is not as totalitarian as the interview portrays it to be, because the DPRK is in fact a vibrant democracy. Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il and Kim Jong-un are not dictators, as they all had to run in elections to stay in power, just like any other member of the DPRK's government. The leader of North Korea is elected via secret ballot, though the reason why the leaders have been elected are all descendants of Comrade Kim Il-sung is, yes, because of the sort of cult of personality that is around the Kim family. However, this cult of personality could be a byproduct of Asian culture. People in the West tend to value what they think is freedom and individualism, but in Eastern Asia, the people tend to value honor and loyalty. In Japan, China, Korea, Vietnam or Singapore, Confucianism stresses duty, sincerity, loyalty, honor and respect through maintaining harmonious relations as individuals. Generally, this is the East Asian mentality when it comes to leadership. Now, the reason why I'm saying this is because I have actually lived in Asia, and I have to say, from a personal perspective, I think that Asian culture is far better than Western culture. In fact, whilst I'm on the subject of cult of personality, wherever you go in the world, you will find a cult of personality. For example, here in Britain, you can find statues and monuments to former prime ministers, statues and monuments of former monarchs from the royal family and so on. There are statues of Kim Il-sung in Pyongyang. Why? It is because Kim Il-sung is a very important person. He founded North Korea. Kim Il-sung defeated the Japanese colonialists. Kim Il-sung drove the US imperialists out of North Korea. So, am I against the fact that there are statues and monuments of Kim Il-sung and the Korean People's Army in North Korea? No, not at all. The political parties in the DPRK consist of obviously the Workers' Party of Korea, then there is the Korean Social Democratic Party, and then there is the Chondoist Chongu Party. The people of North Korea exercise state power through their representative organs, the Supreme People's Assembly and local people's assemblies at all levels. The DPRK is a country that is founded upon Marxism-Leninism, so the North Korean state is really an instrument wielded by the working class over the overthrown capitalist class / Japanese colonialists that will eventually wither away, given that internal and external class enemies cease to exist. In the DPRK, the workers are the state. North Korea is a proletarian state. The DPRK emphasizes progress and socialist culture. Women in North Korea are treated in the same way as men are. Women are encouraged to work alongside men, and both genders are paid equally. If the DPRK was some sort of monarchy, women would be told to stay at home and clean whilst the men worked. The DPRK may be slightly nationalistic, not because they hate all non-Koreans, but because they wish to protect their sovereignty from US imperialism. Therefore, this movie is another typical imperialist movie, as it depicts the United States as the world's saviour and the victim, when reality clearly shows us otherwise. Before I go on to number 1, here are a few honourable mentions.
That my sins would return to visit me. And the cost is more than I can bear.
Number 1. Team America World Police. Coming in at number 1 is Team America World Police. I put this movie at number 1 because I feel that it really dives deep into the uneducated and deluded minds of die-hard supporters of the USA. Team America World Police is a movie that was created using string puppets as characters, and the message that this movie tries to portray is that US foreign policy is a force for bringing liberation and freedom to oppressed countries.
All right, team, that's it. We've got a job to do. Let's go police the world!
The movie's main villain is Kim-Jong, who is portrayed as a totalitarian dictator, whereas reality shows us otherwise, as Kim Jong-il was elected as the leader of the DPRK, and so was his son, Kim Jong-un. The movie portrays the United States fighting against Al-Qaeda terrorists and freeing the Middle East, whereas history shows us that during the 1980s, the Afghan government called in the Soviet Red Army to fight the US-backed terrorist group, the Mujahideen, who unfortunately defeated the Soviet Red Army and later became Al-Qaeda. Therefore, whilst I was watching this movie, I really had to scratch my head, because the foreign policy of the United States is an instrument that the US government uses to oppress other countries who don't open up their borders to American banks and multinational corporations. The foreign policy of the United States also goes against the interests of the people of the United States as well, because the capitalist ruling class in the United States deliberately lies about any country that it wants to invade. For instance, when the United States wanted to invade Libya, there were news reports being broadcasted that stated that Gaddafi was raping women in his palace and that he was giving Viagra to his soldiers to help them rape women. However, the reality was that there was no evidence for these claims, and when rebels finally captured Gaddafi's compound in 2011, they found that Gaddafi's compound looked more like a military bunker than any kind of palace. Also, with the recent chemical attack in Syria, I am 100% with Assad. The USA is lying. Assad said that the United States is lying, and I am with him 100%. The US government has lied about this stuff before. The Iraq war was a lie. The US war in Afghanistan was a lie. I could keep going all day. The guerrilla movements that are being operated by the United States, Saudi Arabia and Israel that are fighting against Assad have used chemical weapons several times. Therefore, anyone who is a die-hard supporter of the United States should really check their intelligence, because US foreign policy is possibly the main reason why the United States is one of the most hated countries in the world, as it transforms countries that are doing just fine into absolute shitholes. So there you have it, comrades. That was my video on the top 5 movies that are full of US propaganda. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.